Hello everyone, welcome to another live. My apologies for signing in late. I was scrambling in here, making sure I'm packing and organizing, doing all the tidying up sometimes that's required. Now, full body mobility, that is the topic for today. But I also wanted to go through misconceptions about mobility training, and you can ask me questions about that in the chat. We have our stretching competition going on where you can compete with other users for fantastic prizes. So make sure you check out those details on the app. And our flexible back challenge starts Monday. So if you want to find out more about that, you can head over to our link in bio. And I have to make sure to get you down a little bit. Yes, let's get the mat going. So before we get started, I wanted to ask the fam your understanding of mobility training, because I am FRC certified, where I underwent their training course for mobility. And I learned that there is a distinct difference between flexibility and mobility. Also clarified a lot of confusion I had on my part. And the photo you see here is an indication of what you might also see on the internet that designates as mobility training. This isn't exactly mobility training. And our team member who creates the thumbnails and everything, he just kind of picks what he thinks matches the topic. And generally, one might think that something of this nature is considered mobility training. It's just the dynamic flow I was doing, but I'll show you what actual mobility training is, because it's actually not that pretty and not that graceful looking. But I'll also show you what you can do. Thank you. I'm filming something after this, so that's why there's a little makeup on. I'll also show you different stretch sequences you can do that are not necessarily static in nature, because I understand how people want a little more movement and a little more texture to their stretching routine, that it can feel a little dull, for sure. So we could go over those options as well. But I just wanted to clarify, mobility training is strength training essentially, where you impose isometric work to the joint specifically, to the specific joint, in order to teach it to express force at its end range. And yes, there are actually, well, I'm not entirely sure if our editor worked on the mobility videos already that I taught a few months ago, because we introduced it a few months ago. I think it should be there, but I'll be happy to share what those mobility exercises are like. And I actually went over a few of them this past summer for the hip flexors, for the hamstrings. And of course, if you're already a subscriber to the app, those will just be included on your subscription. There's no extra payment for them. It's just extra content, which is great because we're now expanding into the realm of mobility training. And that is the basic difference. Flexibility is passive range of motion. Mobility is expressing force in that range of motion. And it's a lot more than just stretching. Now, strength training, mobility is a type of strength training, but it's not going to be traditional strength training because we are still a flexibility app. So I don't think we'll delve into that, since that is a completely different ball game. But mobility does include strength training by nature because of the tension that you also have to input to get that specific outcome. It might not be seen as strength training traditionally, but technically it is, just by default. When you are imposing tension or creating that tension in your muscles to induce a certain outcome, a strength outcome, creating that conditioning for your muscles, that is technically strength training. It might not involve a barbell, but it could. We just don't have that on the app. we're starting from a baseline level where you rely on your own body weight to create these forces for said mobility outcomes. Now, this is just an example. And I think I showed this example before, where you might see the following labeled as mobility training, right? So you might see this. This isn't mobility training. This is just moving your legs side to side. It might be understood as mobility training because you see the hip joints moving in space and you're not just seeing the person hold the stretch, right? So that dynamic movement implies there's some type of mobilization, right? In terms of the motion you're moving your legs. But in terms of mobility, first of all, a lot of joints are moving. Yes, specifically the hips, but your knees are, and your ankles, and your spine. So if you wanted to focus or target those joints specifically, meaning if you actually wanted to increase the range of your frog, this dreadful position, and yes, this live will be saved as a reel on the main feed. So once this live concludes, make sure you head over to our main feed to see it from the beginning, or continue from where you left off if you have to leave. That leg switch is virtually the frog position as you see here. Now, I can just hold that position for like 2 minutes until my hips lower down, or maybe until it feels okay. Initially, it might feel intense. So in order to kind of signal to the nervous system that this is okay, the longer you stay, it gets the message, right? Now, what makes it mobility training? You now have to impose tension to this position, specifically your hip joints. In the PAILs and rails, meaning progressive angular isometric loading, I don't actually change the position, but right now I'm tensing my entire body using the law of irradiation. That means tensing the entire body in order to impose that tension directly into the hip joint, as if I'm pushing my legs, knees through the floor, but everything stays put. And that isometric contraction is happening on the lengthened side of the stretch, which is on the inner thigh side. You ramp up to a tension as much as you can sustain for 10 to 15 seconds. Now, if this is your first time trying to squeeze your legs together, you probably won't ramp up until like not beyond 50%. But eventually you'll develop the strength and the force to ramp up close to your 100, your like 1 rep max for isometric loading. And then you hold that for 10 to 15 seconds. And the rails is the regressive. Now you contract the shortened side of the stretch. That's the outside tush side, as if you're trying to lift your knees off the floor. But of course, the legs stay put. You contract as much as possible, and you ramp up to an effort, again, that you can sustain for 10 to 15 seconds, and then you release. What does this do? And how is it different from PNF? PNF only requires you maybe to put in 20, I'm going to give it 15 to 30% of your effort max, which is quite low. It could hack the nervous system in telling it to give you a little more range of motion. But ramping up to a higher degree of effort is now creating more intelligence in your hip joint, where it now understands not only to recognize the range of motion, but to now have strength in that range of motion. And it doesn't stop there. Just squeezing isometrically is the baseline entryway for beginners, because it's not recommended in the system that you move on to eccentric and shortening when moving through space in these wider ranges of motion. But just trying to master your range of motion that's available to you now is the first step. And that is an example of mobility training. I wasn't moving my legs side to side. I wasn't doing fan kicks, right? I just stayed. But the amount of effort required to induce that tension in that position specifically is tough. It is tough. Another example, not even getting into the isometrics, but something that you might have seen is shoulder circles. I think somewhere on the internet, people have dubbed this as mobility training. The shoulders are moving around, it's dynamic, right? You're mobilizing, right? Sure, you can make the argument that you're moving your shoulders around, but in actual mobility training, circular articular rotations, CARS for short, that's the acronym. Circular meaning is circular in fashion, articular in that you are articulating the global movement capacity of said joint. Rotation, you're taking it through that rotation. Is not just willy-nilly, because again, if we're focusing on the joint itself, you're trying to isolate that joint's capacity, so you cannot allow any other part of your body to interfere. And it is also an opportunity to see what limitations that joint has, but hard to if you're not actually isolating that joint's movement. As an example, you really can't tell what's happening with your shoulder or its limitations, what it needs to work on, if you're just kind of swinging around, right? Okay. Now, if you make it more strict, meaning if you start with a straight elbow and across the midline, so I don't just have the arm by my side, but I cross the midline. If you cut across the midline, you start to now express flexion and rotation, because it is rotated from the very beginning. Now you go through even more extension, you still go through flexion, but here, you now have to rotate. Now what usually happens here? Sometimes the person moves the torso, sometimes they have to bend the elbow. That's an indication that the joint is not functional, because based on function, it should be able to rotate and flex without compromise from the rest of the body. So we continue that rotation, rotate. Now it goes through that extension, extension meaning when you start to sweep it back. So you go through your flexion, your rotation, continue. Now you internally rotate it, and when reversing, that's where you extend, rotate, and come back through. It's a lot tougher than this, as you probably can tell. Try it. Let's do the other side together. You could do this standing, by the way. I'm just here so you could see closer. Straight elbow, palm forward, and start across the midline. Now, keep that rotation and start to flex. Make sure as you continue your rotation back into your internal rotation, don't let this happen. Don't let the chest collapse. Don't do anything funny with the neck. You see how it could get a little glitchy, okay? If that happens, or more importantly, if you feel pain during any point of this circle, that means you have to lessen the range of motion and work with that range that is not painful, okay? And if we return, so my shoulder rotation continues with that internal, and now I extend, I start to rotate, keep that chest forward, bring it up and down. Again, a lot more difficult than this. So you're like, okay, Lisa, then what you would call that? I would just call that shoulder circles. I wouldn't necessarily categorize it as mobility training. You're just doing some shoulder circles. I would actually say more accurately to be described as a dynamic stretch. Dynamic doesn't necessarily have to mean impact, but it does imply movement, and technically I am stretching across my chest in the shoulders. I think that's more accurate, a more accurate description than mobility. But again, the word mobility can often be conflated with movement, and because it's moving is mobility training. That's not necessarily true. Yes, you're moving your arm through space, but it is mobility training because it's more specific to the joint itself and is trying to highlight the joint's capacity to move as well as its limitations. And that's where you can strategize in choosing the appropriate mobility exercises to unlock maybe the rotation part, so that if you encounter a pinching, or you find that when trying to rotate, you extend the spine to accommodate, or you flex the spine, something happens from the rest of your body, then you can better strategize. Okay, I got to work on my abduction, my rotation. I got to work on my flexion, my extension. Excuse me. Same thing with the hip. And I have to stand for this one. Actually, you don't have to stand. You can do this lying down, but it's easier to see standing. Okay? Now, you begin lifting the leg up. Let me hold on to this. Rotating it from the hip and crossing the midline. So we start with the flexion, rotation, and adduction. Now you open the hip out. This is where it gets sticky. You rotate and you move into your hip extension, but make sure you keep it an extension of the hip and you don't involve the lower back. This is, on average, one of the more difficult parts of the pathway, because when people start to go into their internal rotation and extension, they arch the back. You want to keep the spine as neutral as possible, and again, isolate the hips movement capacity. So if you continue, you go into your extension and you move it forward and you reverse, same thing, hip, 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 hip. You abduct, you rotate, flex, adduct. It is gnarly. But again, you might see this on the internet and people will dub it as mobility training because you're moving your legs around. No, that is not mobility training. What you saw there was the beginning of mobility training, and that is the base level that you start with from a joint level, making sure your hip joint, and this applies to all your joints, neck, shoulders, even spine, hip, ankles, your fingers, toes, elbows, wrists, yeah, all of that. All of that, knees, with the knee joint, maybe you lock it in so again you don't move from your hip, but you rotate, you extend, you rotate, you flex. You just want to move from your knee joint. And it's tricky because you might just move your ankle. You want to try to isolate the knee's capacity to rotate. Your knees can rotate, and you can strengthen that rotation. Because guess what? They might rotate when you're skiing, if you ski, or if you do something that is just very knee dynamic in whatever activity you participate in. If your knee can't rotate, it probably should. Because guess what happens if it rotates by accident? So that is the starting point. Can you actually express those movements with the said joint? And you could even just practice the rotation like this. You could place your fingers either side of your knee and feel it rotate. It's actually kind of fun. And if you find that is hard to do, don't worry about it. Just practice. And think about your toes moving on the same plane. So you don't just want to move the toe side to side. You want to move from the knee. And it's helpful to place your fingers on either side so that you could actually feel that happening. Same thing with your elbows for the cars. You could start with the palms up and then palms down. Palms up, palms down. And you guessed right, you could hold on to weights, but that's not the starting point. That's only if you've mastered your own body weight and you could fully express your joint's global capacity of movement, meaning it could get through the entire gamut of movement without pain or restriction. Then you can start adding load. But you got to get through the pain and glitches first. Okay? And then you could also work on the eccentric loading where you load the lengthened part of the movement and really get into it. It's a lot of fun. Mobility training is tough and it's not recognized as like the most exciting work because when you see elite mobility specialists working, I mean, the amount of focus and concentration required is immense. That might not be appealing to a lot of people because it's not like you're deadlifting, it's not like you're doing pull-ups. It's more concentrated, and at face value, it might not look entertaining. But that's probably some of the most important work you can do because you are strengthening your joint at like the most foundational level possible so that the compound movements just feel more seamless and you create more variety, more movement variation in your body, meaning your body has now recognized multiple movement pathways to work through to figure it out. That's a great question. When should I be doing mobility training versus stretching? You could actually do mobility training whenever you like because it's isometric in nature. In terms of one level of it, it won't interfere with your other training if you do lift or you participate in sport because it's not going to induce the same amount of strain to your muscles like lifting could. Now, this is also depending on how you program. For instance, on days where I'm just doing upper body, when I'm lifting and stuff like that, I'll stretch my legs between sets. This is if you have like limited time. And it's okay if you don't dedicate an entire stretching routine or an entire mobility routine at once. You might have to find pockets of opportunity. So for stretching, maybe you're doing upper body and then you can do mobility drills in between your upper body drills. Like you could superset them. So like let's say you're doing the dumbbell chest press and then you come down near the bench, you go into your 90-90 and you do your pails and rails 90-90 lunges, where you're trying to drive up as much tension as possible, tense up the entire body, ramp it to an effort you can hold for 10 to 15 seconds, and then you try to contract the opposite, again, ramp up to 10 to 15 seconds, and then you go into your nice stretch, and then you do another set. That's what I do. That's what I do. Or you can dedicate the entire session to your mobility training. Maybe if you want to do mobility and stretching, maybe you're just doing stretching for your legs, but you do mobility exercises for the upper body. For instance, I don't have the right setup here, but to set up shoulder flexion where you push down against something as much as you can, and then you try to lift the arm up, again, pails and rails for the shoulder, And between that, maybe you do straddle. And you hold this for 2 minutes. And then you come up and you do the other side. You mobility for the shoulder. I'm pushing down on the chair by the way, so I'm ramping up tension in that flexed position. So I'm pushing down and then lifting up as if I'm lifting the arm off the chair, but it stays put. So I'm contracting the shortened side of the position, and then you do straddle again. So that's how I like to integrate all these different exercises, because I know it can feel overwhelming, and a lot of it is presented where you got the strength program, you got the stretch program, you got the mobility program. As someone who, despite that this is their main line of work, right? I understand how this is not for everyone in terms of adapting all these separate programs. It's okay to do bits and pieces at a time. I know that might not be the ideal trade-off for optimal, but we're not going for optimal. We're going for just enough. For the regular person who wants to improve their range of motion, also wants to improve their mobility, just enough works fine. What does that mean? You might just be taking the local instead of the express train, but as long as you're on the train, we're doing fine. Don't worry about getting on the express train. Just get on the train. So even if you're going locally, you can still work on everything you want to improve. You can still work on your strength. You can still work on your range of motion. You can still work on your mobility. You might just have to program it a little differently to suit your lifestyle in a way that's not going to take up so much bandwidth, that is not going to keep you in the gym for 2 hours at a time, because that's just not realistic. So you might have to chop it up. Fine. And you might just work on the thing that needs the most attention now. Sure, maybe your shoulders need the mobility training, but your hips are really bad. So you prioritize your hips for a few weeks, and then you go move on to the shoulders. Done. And that's fine. So I wanted to reserve a little bit of time for some questions, because I did sign in late. Everyone. So I wanted to spend kind of 3 more minutes here on the live in case you had more questions. And just so you know, because I thank you for the comment about my arms. I'm sorry I didn't get the username. This is from lifting heavy. This is from doing pull-ups. This is from doing weighted push-ups, weighted rows. Of course, they're weighted rows, weighted. Okay. And as an example, thank you, Diana. Right now, my best is 10 pull-ups. And when you pull up, you also target the bicep. Now, if I wanted bigger biceps, I will do more isolations, which I have done in the past, but as of late, my training sessions have become edited. So I mainly prioritize the compound movements. But if I wanted stronger, if I wanted to excel in my pull-ups, I would be including my bicep curls, but I'll be better about that. Same thing with triceps. When I'm doing skull crushers, I have a 50-pound dumbbell. 50. It's not a 5-pound dumbbell. It's not a 10-pound dumbbell. It's a 50-pound dumbbell in an 8 to 12 rep range. That's why I have these. It takes a lot of work. I just want to put that out there. I'm not doing this stuff. I'm not. And that's fine to do. But if you want to change your arm shape, you have to give your arms a reason to change. If the signal is not loud enough, They're not going anywhere. Just want to put that out there. But still stretch and do your mobility. And you could stretch with weights as well. That's a whole different conversation. My gosh. I mean, I could go on and on and on. On and on and on and on. However, thank you so much for joining. I hope this helped. I hope this also clarified any confusion when it comes to mobility and flexibility training. And the Stretch It team is excited to share more mobility classes on the app. Please make sure you share your feedback with reviews. If there are any questions or concerns, or maybe there's something I need to work on, support@stretchitapp.com for sure. Or you could comment on this video. The team will review the feedback there. Whatever's easier for you, because we are truly trying to give you the best out there. And I, as a teacher, want to make sure that you guys feel comfortable with this new content, you know what's going on, and more importantly, you feel the improvement from the mobility lessons. So definitely let us know. Always a pleasure, family. Thank you for taking the time to join our live. It was fun today. It was fun. And I'll make sure to see everyone again soon. Next Saturday, 1 p.m. Eastern. Enjoy October. October is my favorite month. And it's not even my birthday month. My birthday is in January, for crying out loud. October is the month for me. I am in the Northeast. So because we get the change in the foliage in terms of the colors, it gets cooler. That's my jam. I know it's not for everyone, but this is where I thrive. So if you are in a similar climate situation as I am, embrace and enjoy it. I hope you love it. And until then, family, I will see you all again soon. Take care and have a good day. Bye.